When Lincoln learned on June 1, 1862, that Jackson was retreating from the Potomac, he had made up his mind that the Union plan of operation in Virginia must be changed. This is evidenced by the sequence of decisions he made as the month of June unfolded. On the morning of June 1, at McClellan's behest, Lincoln had ordered Franz Sigel, who had recently arrived at Washington from the west, to go to Fort Monroe and join McClellan. But several hours later he had countermanded the order, replacing it with an order that the brigades of Joseph Cooper and John Slough be consolidated as a division, and ordered Sigel to go to Harper's Ferry to take command of it and join Banks's corps, which he had ordered to pursue Jackson in cooperation with Shields' division of McDowell's corps and Fremont's command, then wandering southward through the Appalachian. On the same day, Lincoln had ordered John Dix, who then was commanding the Department of Maryland, to take command of the Department of Virginia, and ordered John Wool to take Dix's place at Baltimore. A week later, Lincoln ordered John Pope, who recently had made a splash in the newspapers in his capture of Island No. 10 in Madrid, Missouri, to come to Washington. And as Pope is traveling to the place, Lincoln sets off by train for West Point in a public show of consulting retired General Winfield Scott, who the press report, as Lincoln returns to Washington, recommends that the forces Lincoln has scattered about Virginia be collected in one place and formed into an army positioned to, first, protect Washington from any efforts to reach it, and second, to move forward toward Richmond by the line of the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. By the end of June, Lincoln has appointed Pope a Major General of Volunteers and assigns him to command what he calls the Army of Virginia. And he orders McDowell, Fremont, and Banks to bring their forces together on the east side of the Blue Ridge under Pope's command. And among these units ordered east was Piatt's brigade, which, since Jackson left the valley for Richmond, was occupying Winchester. Lincoln assigned a Chicago Republican politician and insurance salesman, Julius White, who he had appointed a brigadier general on June 9, to take Piatt's place, and with 4 regiments taken from Sigel's and Fremont's forces, finished the construction of 3 forts Piatt had begun constructing at Winchester and hold the place. Sometime in the 1840s, Julius White came from New York State to Wisconsin as an agent of an insurance company his family had an interest in. Making a success of the business, White entered Wisconsin politics as a Whig with pronounced positive attitudes toward abolitionism, and this got him elected to the state legislature. In the 1850s, he removed himself to Chicago and became an important financial supporter of the state Republican Party, and by 1860, this had brought him into personal contact with Lincoln. During the presidential campaign of 1860, Lincoln had dined at White's house, and afterwards came a campaign speech from the porch of the residence to a crowd that had gathered upon the word spreading of his presence there. When the war broke out in April 1861, using his own funds, White organized the 37th Illinois Volunteer Regiment, assuming the role of its colonel. In July of that year, the regiment was in Missouri as part of Fremont's army and operated with it until the fall of 1861, when Lincoln removed Fremont from command in Missouri, when Fremont refused to rescind a proclamation he had issued purporting to free the Africans. By February 1862, White's regiment, now under the command of Curtis's army, was marching on the Wire Road, skirmishing with the retreating Confederate army through southwestern Missouri to Sugar Creek, Arkansas, where, in the first week of March 1862, he participated in the Battle of Pea Ridge as commander of the 37th and 59th Illinois Regiments. On May 7, 1862, at the command of his division commander, White had taken his two regiments along with a battery across a farm field and into a tangled woodland occupied by 4 Arkansas regiments, composing part of one wing of Sterling Price's army, which was advancing to meet them. Leaving the battery to unlimber in the farm field, White pushed his regiments forward in line of battle, climbing over fallen trees, traversing ravines. The men in White's line of battle came upon the Arkansas regiments in the midst of the tangled woods, and a fierce firefight erupted between the opposing lines and lasted for about an hour, when suddenly the Illinoisans found themselves being flanked and their unity cracked as a brigade, and their front crumbled, and White, in reaction, screamed for the men in their ranks to make a right wheel. And in the confusion of the men in their execution of the order, the 37th Illinois fell back toward the battery, while the 59th drifted off to the right, and the Arkansans poured past the 59th left flank, charging the retreating 37th, and seized 2 of the guns of the battery, which were trying to limber as the men of the 37th ran past it into the farm field. Realizing this was happening, the Union Division commander sent forward to the right of the 59th Illinois the 22nd and 18th Indiana, and they all went into the woods, gaining the rear of the Confederate line. And this caused the Arkansans to break off their charge in a panic and pull 2 of the Union guns with them back toward their main body, while fresh Union regiments pressed them back into the woods. The 37th Illinois Regiment had entered the woods 450 strong. In the 45 minutes of the back-and-forth struggle, they lost 21 men killed and 121 wounded. White's baptism of fire cost the 37th 31% casualties. A month later, White was in Chicago on leave of absence. His decimated regiment left at Cassville, Missouri, while Curtis marched his army off toward Little Rock. A week or so after White's return to Chicago, a congressman representing Cook County named Isaac Arnold, an important political ally of Lincoln, wrote Lincoln a letter requesting that he appoint White a brigadier general of volunteers as a reward for his performance at Pea Ridge. Lincoln made the appointment by endorsing his approval on the letter and though there was some delay in Congress, by June 8th, White's appointment was confirmed. With his new star on his shoulder, White appeared in Washington in July as Lincoln was ordering Henry Halleck to turn over the Department of the West to Grant and come to Washington. Lincoln, by this time, having returned on the steamer Ariel from Harrison's Landing, his mind made up to dump McClellan as quickly as possible. Convinced by McClellan's actions and his words and speeches that the military effort that had been mounted against Richmond had ended in stalemate and would not be revived. By this time, July 17, 1862, the Congress has passed the Confiscation Act, declaring the Africans held as slaves in the seceded states to be now forever free, and instructing the President, in giving notice of this, to employ the Africans who came within Union control in a manner that relieved the Union soldiers from the burden of laboring to construct fortifications. Using the act as his guide, on July 22, Lincoln presents a draft of the required proclamation to his cabinet, but Seward, Chase, and Blair react negatively, and he puts it away. With the elements of the new Army of Virginia now coming together at Culpeper and Halleck now functioning as Lincoln's mouthpiece, transmitting his orders to the commanders, Lincoln sees Julius White standing by with hat in hand, and he orders him to take Piatt's place at Winchester. When White arrived at Winchester on July 30, he found present for duty as the regiments of his adopted brigade, the 32nd Ohio Regiment, under the Ohio politician Thomas Ford, the 60th Ohio, under another Ohio politician and farmer named William Trimble, the 39th New York, under the command of Colonel Frederick D'Utassi, a fellow who by 1863 would be serving time in Sing Sing for defrauding the government. The 4th Regiment of the brigade was the 9th Vermont, which was mustered in on July 9, 1862, under the command of a farmer named George Stannard, and it arrived at Winchester on July 26. Upon his arrival, White found the men of the regiments, those not on picket duty or foraging the countryside for berries, engaged in the work of digging trench lines and rifle pits in the interior of the 3 forts African laborers had constructed. By August 9, with the happening of the battle at Cedar Mountain, heavy artillery pieces arrived by the railroad and were dragged by the soldiers into the forts and installed on timbered platforms laid down on mounds of earth the Africans had built up. On August 16, the daily train from Harper's Ferry was stopped and robbed by Confederate cavalry, which White reported to Pope and Halleck, White telling them, in response to the nervous questions, that his scouts were finding the enemy seeping into the valley at Front Royal, and he worried an infantry force too large for his brigade to handle might appear before Winchester. A month earlier, when Pope became the commander of the Army of Virginia, he had telegraphed Piatt at Winchester an order to defend the place to the last, even if an enemy force were to appear greater in weight than his. Pope said he would assault it in the rear before it could do Piatt damage. Now, on August 16, when Pope received reports from his front at the Rappahannock that a dust cloud rising from a long column of marching men suggested Lee's army had veered toward the valley, he took White's report seriously and told Halleck he would pursue the enemy. Pope's belief of Lee's intentions was reinforced on August 24 when White reported that, again, Confederate cavalry this time had captured a train and burned it. By August 27, White was telling Pope enemy infantry, an unknown force, was approaching Winchester. But by that time, Pope was converging on Manassas Junction, having woken up in the morning to the fact that Stonewall Jackson had sacked the place. For Henry Halleck's part, during these latter days of August, he had no idea where exactly Pope's army was, much less where General Lee's army was. Everything was dark. All he could discern from the reports received was that the enemy was turning Pope's flank, getting on his line of communications, and getting closer and closer to Washington. Then came abruptly the horrible news that the Union Army had collapsed at Bull Run again. And though not quite the rout as the year before, it was struggling to organize a line at Fairfax Courthouse and hold the enemy back. By this time, McClellan had appeared at Alexandria, and Lincoln, with a sick feeling in his stomach, told Halleck to tell McClellan he was in command of the field army again, and Halleck ordered McClellan on August the 29th to get Franklin's corps on the fast march for Bull Run. But despite Halleck repeating his orders several times, McClellan refused to obey. And Pope, now pressed again by Jackson at Chantilly, Halleck had no choice but to order the Army of Virginia to retreat to the forts of Washington. And he wired White at Winchester, spike the heavy guns, destroy the commissary supplies, and abandon the place. Of course, it is silly to think these were Halleck's decisions, Halleck's orders. In May 1862, when Jackson appeared in the lower valley, it was Stanton, acting as Lincoln's mouthpiece, who issued the orders that brought the four brigadiers, Saxton, Cooper, Slough, and their regiments, and Hamilton to the Ferry. Stanton had bypassed John Dix, who then was responsible for the security of the Baltimore-Ohio Railroad, in the issuance of these orders, but now, on September 2, with indications already received that General Lee meant to cross the Potomac into Maryland, Lincoln had Halleck in Stanton's place issuing the orders. And his mind certainly can be understood to be focused entirely on shoring up what must have been perceived as Washington's tenuous security. Lincoln had Stanton wire the governors of the adhering states to immediately round up all the militia force still in their states and send it to Washington to bolster the defense of the place against what on that day, more than any other in the history of the war, Lincoln feared the game was lost. Still, he could not let the public see him give up possession of the valley, now being touted to the public as an essential part of the new state of West Virginia. So he chose to use his Brigadier General of Volunteers, his personally endorsed Brigadier Julius White, as the stand-in for Saxton, and gamble that his presence at Harper's Ferry would hold at bay what Confederate force might attempt to duplicate the approach Jackson had made to it in May 1862. His mind never thinking for a moment what General Lee actually meant to do. His mind so flushed with the vision of General Lee's victorious army. Pennsylvania Governor Curtin was reporting his force was 200,000 strong, appearing at any moment in front of Washington.